And so there's been a lot of studies over the years that are looking at the return on investment energy-wise, energy in to energy out for the solar panels themselves has been in the 1 year, 2 year range. And if you look at the rest of the equipment, the inverter, mounting system, wiring, all the rest, we can have systems that are in the 2 years, 3 years energy return on investment. So, you put that solar into production, and after 2 or 3 years, you've made back all the energy that it took to build that equipment, right? Then everything else for the next 10, 15, 20 years is basically a net positive energy gain.
Hey, thanks so much for coming on, Kris. Really great to have you here today, and really looking forward to diving in and learning more about SEI. You were just telling me about some of your travels overseas, and really curious to learn more about, you mentioned Oman.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. This is exciting. I'm happy to be here and participate as representative of Solar Energy International. Just as an example, we're based here in Western Colorado, but we work nationally and internationally as an organization. I have been running a lot of our international programs, our English-speaking international programs specifically over the years. And I just got back a few weeks ago from a month in the Middle East where I'd been doing business for quite a while. I was teaching classes in Oman, so in Muscat, Oman, which is the capital city. Oman's a beautiful country, and it's been moving from oil and gas into trying to diversify its energy mix in a lot of ways. The country there is very oil and gas heavy. It's really where the base of the income comes from for the government, for the country, and a lot of the employment. So it's interesting to see, and I think this is fascinating, just as someone who's been in the solar industry a long time, seeing large scale oil companies start to migrate and expand their generation capacities, and looking at a place that's into the future that you often wouldn't expect from oil companies. So on this last trip, I happened to be working for Petroleum Development Oman, which is the oil company for the country. There's also big, other companies involved there, like Shell and BP and others that are involved in oil and gas. And so it's really, I think, in a way, exciting to see places like this being able to be forward thinking and looking at next steps.
So what's the attraction that solar holds for a large oil producing entity like that?
I think they see a few things. They know that their market is changing. They know that the global market for energy is changing, and they want to diversify their market. So they're not just the one thing that they've always done for the last 50, 70 years that's been successful. They see a changing landscape, and they're trying to be part of it. A lot of the oil companies that we see around the world, like Total Energy, BP, Shell, and then the smaller regional ones like my customer, Petroleum Development Oman, they're all really in this energy diversification mode. Like they're getting into solar, they're getting into storage, they're getting into different renewables and looking at how they can adapt what they've always done. Some of them, specifically on these larger scales, are looking at using solar for things like green hydrogen production. And so they're saying, how do we kind of stay in our wheelhouse a little bit, but how do we maybe change what we make? And can we use things like solar electricity to make, bigger green sourced hydrogen power plants and, transmission delivery and all that.
And that's essentially a storage method which would reduce some of the problems that we have where, solar is peaking out in its production during the midday, and the grid essentially, it doesn't quite match up. I had a friend in she worked at SRP in Phoenix, Arizona, and she was in their R&D department, and she was looking at how to integrate solar into the electrical grid. And one of the problems she was talking about is like the peak where solar energy hits and the peak demand is not the same. So, you need some way of accounting for that either with storage or by changing the usage patterns
Yep.
in order to make that work effectively with the grid. So that hydrogen, I assume you're splitting water and you're ending up with hydrogen that's burnable. Do they then use that as part of a grid solution? Do they use that as engines that can burn hydrogen? Do you have an idea of how they're using that?
So there's kind of been a lot of this like hydrogen industry, I would say, like start and stop, over the last 20 years. If you've been paying attention to renewables, everyone's trying to like wager their bets into which part of the market is going to be most successful. Is it battery storage? Is it making hydrogen? Is it, fuel cells? Is it wind technologies, right? We've seen hydrogen discussions kind of come up and down over the last few decades as far as success rates. I think there's some companies that are seeing a future for this, and I'm not advocating this necessarily. I'm seeing what they're doing. Our focus is on the solar side. We can generate energy and push it into anything. If the use, basically the hydrogen production becomes the load for the solar to make hydrogen, and I think the appeal to for a lot of people to do that on a large scale could be direct replacement of current functions like pipeline systems, the ability to move the fuel around, the ability to store it, like you mentioned. So you start to say, well, hydrogen and battery systems may be competitors in certain ways because you can store energy in a couple different forms, right? So hydrogen is really an energy storage form, but then has the ability to run through a fuel cell to turn back into electricity, has the ability to be combusted directly, maybe in a hydrogen vehicle power plant, however. So it does become kind of a nice unifier. It's a way that you can distribute a fuel source in what is kind of a traditionally conventional way that's more similar to how a lot of oil and gas is moved and distributed and stored today. So I think that's why we see bigger oil and gas companies looking at that as a solution that's closer to their wheelhouse than things like electricity and battery storage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see, and it's kind of just one of the aspects. But like you mentioned, solar has a production curve, right? When we think about when we make electricity, of course, it has to do with the angle of the sun, the time of the day, and the movement across, basically the solar array. And so we have a production curve with solar that's, sunrise to sunset at peaking in the middle of the day. And so in some places, we have utilities where the solar production and the utilities peak load really don't match very well. In other places, they match perfectly. So it depends on the load profile. How much are they doing heating and cooling versus air conditioning? Is it a cold climate, hot climate? Are we talking about industrial customers? Are we talking about the whole utility system? Residential homes? So there's a lot of different ways you can look at those, like basically load curve to production curve.
Yeah.
Some of them match perfect. Some of them not so much. And that's why utilities say, well, what if we need more production later in the day when it's like hot in the afternoon and we have a heavy air conditioning load on our grid?
This is what they would find in Phoenix,
Exactly.
at 5 p.m. everybody comes home from work, and what do? They turn on the air conditioner.
Exactly.
It's hot in my house.
Yep.
Right. And one of the projects that my friend was working on was actually if the power company could take control of the thermostat, they could basically pre-cool the house a couple hours earlier when they had cheap solar energy. They pre-cool the house, and then the house is cool when you come home, and you got that during the cheapest time of the energy, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So in that sense, they're using the thermal state of the house itself as a battery, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
Right. There's so many different things, the world, physics that we're working with is, can be used as a battery in many different ways.
It is. And it's really cool and fascinating to see how product lines and, different industries keep changing to meet these like smart home technologies and better managed systems, whether it's like thermostat control, like you talked about, it's kind of in some ways low-hanging fruit because it's kind of easy to do. I remember teaching classes down in Austin, Texas, like 15 years ago, and Austin Energy was the first one I ever saw they had a program where you could put in a new thermostat that they could manage and you get a discount on your bill. Mm-hmm. And it was a way for them to manage peak load on the grid. Mm-hmm. Instead of like pre-cooling, like you're talking about, they were managing the peak issues. And so what they would do is say, well, if we can strategically turn off air conditioners around the city, we can actually reduce the peak demand at that like 5, 6, 7 o'clock on a hot day. And what they would do is they'd turn your air conditioner off for just like 30 minutes. Not enough for your house to get like super hot, but just enough that if they cycle that around, they can manage their grid. So that's kind of an early way to do it. What we're starting to see is a lot more, smart home devices and appliances and things that communicate, where we are moving to a place where how do we be more strategic with energy and not just like let it happen when it happens, but how do we control it? Like if we have electric vehicles at home, we can control the charging of those electric vehicles based on peak time, off-peak time, what the rate structure is. I used to do some EV charging stations where we just put in timers at the client's house and they would plug in and the car wouldn't actually start charging until midnight when they had the cheapest electricity. Okay. Right? Now what's interesting is we're starting to go there.
Why did they have the cheapest electricity at midnight?
Because it's the lowest in a lot of markets. Usage? That's the lowest usage time. Okay. So they have excess generation available and not as much consumption from like midnight till like 5 a.m., for example. So that's kind of one strategy that we saw in the early days when prices of electricity were going up. How do we hit those big like EV charging demands late at night to not tax the grid? Flip side of that, as we see higher penetrations of solar, how much solar we have in certain grids, we're actually going the other way where we're seeing, especially in places with a lot of solar like California, Hawaii, a few other places, we're seeing solar power plants being throttled down during the middle of the day because they have too much production capacity available and the grid doesn't need it at that time.
Right.
So we're actually going to see this like transitional flip from, let's charge the cars at night to let's charge the cars at the middle of the afternoon when we have the highest amount of excess solar.
Right.
And then where that's going is we're seeing a movement of like vehicle to grid technologies where we can say, I charge the car during the middle of the day, and if I have it set up this way, I can actually dump the car battery back into the building or maybe back into the grid during those later times of the
But then
load.
this also gets into the cycles of people's lifestyles because where is a person's car during the day? Mm-hmm. It's at their place of work.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So then that means you need the charging station at the place of work
that is able to have that compatibility.
And you're expecting more at the home that the energy will be actually getting drawn out of the car and into the grid, and maybe it takes 30% out. So it's at 70% in the morning. You've still got enough to drive to work.
Exactly.
But you have to work around people's lifestyles and their expectations to make all of this work. It requires a lot of coordination.
You do. And I think to me what the exciting part of this is we're seeing this movement in technology with smarter electronics, better software, better control systems, the ability to convert electricity in different ways in and out of a vehicle, solar to batteries, solar to electric grid, utility interaction. All that stuff is becoming so much more capable today than it was 10 years ago and light years beyond where it was 20 years ago. And so it's not that there's one right answer with this whole thing, but there's becoming more and more options on the market to do smart consumption and production in different ways that can be more automated, programmable, to meet whatever the market or the customer's profile is. You can say, okay, use my battery, but as long as you keep 70% in there, so I have 200 miles or whatever available at all times, then sure, use the value of that battery that's sitting in my garage. So there's just a lot of different strategies when we look at it from like a residential load strategy, commercial and industrial is kind of going to have different approaches. And then utility scale has a whole different approach to it as well on how utilities manage their grids with energy storage on large scales, right? So I just think it's exciting times right now where we're seeing these capabilities that are far exceeding where we thought it might have been 10 years ago.
Yeah, and you're actually seeing the usage of the resources get much more intelligent.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, so intelligent load management as well as intelligent production and storage.
So if you take a customer like your clients in Oman, what causes them to reach out to a United States company on the Western Slope and say, you guys have the answers, we need to talk to you?
I know, it's kind of funny that way, isn't it? Well, from that, this is really, from an SEI standpoint, this is just a very small niche of our bigger program. But we actually taught our first class in Dubai over 10 years ago. And so kind of started doing, basically, somebody found us and asked us to come and deliver a training program. And we did. And then that led to some word of mouth, some marketing, a little bit, putting our toe in that water as we started to see this potential growth of, this new market for solar in the Middle East and really all over the world at this point. But, so we were invited once, and then we were invited to come participate in a conference. And then over time, we started doing a bunch of trainings in Dubai. And then, we got reached out to by other regional organizations. We did some work in Kuwait with the Kuwait Ministry of Water and Electricity. And then, there was the beginning of the solar market in Oman. Someone came to us in Dubai and said, hey, we need these programs over here. So we were actually the first solar training provider to be approved by the utilities for the government of Oman. So at about 4 or 5 years ago, we kind of, we were the first one that was approved as a training provider, which meant if someone wants to bid on solar contracts, they have to take a minimum amount of training on top of their engineering licenses and stuff. Mm-hmm. So we were kind of the first one in the door in that market. So it turns out we've just happened to do a lot of training there in that market for, general population, and what I mean by that is people from different companies can come and take our classes, and we'll put up a schedule of training, and someone can just enroll. So we do general public offerings like that, but then we also do a lot of custom clients where a client says, hey, I got 25 people. I want to buy a whole course from you. Can you come and deliver that?
Now, in essence, what you're doing, are you training them on how to design a system for a given purpose and then deploy that?
Not necessarily. And this is the one thing that's really cool with solar electricity or photovoltaic systems. A lot of the design principles, calculations, sizing, all that applies across all scope and scale in a way. A lot of the products are similar. The difference is just the magnitude of the numbers, right? So when you design residential or commercial industrial systems and solar, farms or power plants, I'd say half to 3/4 of the process is exactly the same. It's just, am I putting, 20 panels on the roof of my house? Am I putting 500 panels on the roof of my, factory building? Or am I putting 50,000 panels out to make a giant power plant? The calcs on how you do that and the engineering principles are all pretty much the same across the board. So we can work with clients like that, and it doesn't have to be designed for a specific target like load or purpose. You can teach, kind of in the same breath a little bit, residential, commercial, and utility scale, at least to some degree, because that particular client actually is working in all three of those sectors. They have a bunch of residential projects on their own facilities, commercial projects on their own facilities, and power plants. So what's unique to your approach? What are you teaching them to do that it would have been hard for them to find on their own? It's interesting. It's I think there's a few things that make SEI, I feel unique in the world. And we're not the only company that does what we do. There's quite a few other solar training providers that are out in the market. We happen to be one of the largest in the world that does, this sort of solar training program. And so we get, people come to us because we've been here for a long time. We have a good reputation, and we've just kind of been the market leader in a lot of ways. What makes us different than a lot of other programs is we really take what I think of as a practical approach to solar training. We're not coming from like an academic university research and development kind of perspective. We're really working in the industry, and we're pulling knowledge from the industry to provide education. And so we're much more attached to the solar industry itself than any side of like academia per se.
So you're speaking in a language that a technician who's actually going to be deploying these systems can understand.
Yes.
And you're addressing practical concerns
Yes.
that they have
That's
about the jobs they're going to be doing.
That's exactly what it is. Like our curriculum team, all are, solar professionals first, basically, and then have come in and worked with us to create content. And so all of our, our technical side of our curriculum team, they are involved in solar and involved in content creation. We have a huge team of instructors who all basically work full-time in the solar industry and then part-time as instructors for us. So we really try to do our best to stay up with, everything from codes and standards to product availability, installation methods, best practices, quality control, troubleshooting, and pulling all that from the industry, from the field, like you said, and then teaching, new people who are going into the field the things that other people from the field have already learned, right? So we're really, that's kind of our circle, is industry back to industry.
Yeah, so you have a big library of content that you're able to select from when you're looking at a individual company or their circumstance in their region.
Yes.
And you can select the materials that are going to be appropriate for them.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a huge body of content, of curriculum, and we have courses that are all basically structured program courses that people can take from all over the world. As a organization, we deliver content in a few different ways. We have a huge online training program. So people from all over the world take our online courses. That can be 3,000-4,000 people in a year. As a company, we've been in business for over 30 years now. So we have over 80,000 alumni that have come through our training programs that are scattered all over the world. So big online training programs, in-person classroom classes. We do have hands-on lab facilities as well, like our hands-on training center here in Paonia in Western Colorado. But we also have a small hands-on training center in Costa Rica and one in Oman, where I've been doing work over there lately. So we kind of deliver online, in-person, and hands-on. And then also we do things at a lot of conferences and events. When we do custom training, we're able to take any of those pieces. And, if a company comes and says, hey, I have 20 people, I want to do a custom training for my team. Here's the types of projects we're working on. I'd like it to be a 5-day class or an 8-day class or whatever, 3 days. And here's the topics that we want. We can look at that, customize based on our pool of content and deliver programs for people. So, and we do have English and a lot of our content in Spanish as well. So we have a big market that serves, the Latin America market, Central and South America, and whatever Spanish-speaking regions. So we can do English, Spanish, and then we kind of have some other stuff that's a little more fit to the international market. So the U.S. market has basically some of its characteristics that are different just when it comes to the electrical systems than the rest of the international world as far as codes and standards go. Yeah. A lot of the content from a training perspective is really nearly the same globally because the panels are the same, the inverters are the same, the mounting structures are the same kind of everywhere in the world. So a lot of this content is kind of global, universal, and then things that become more specialized are things like local codes and standards. So in the United States, we use our National Electrical Code, but that's also used by a number of other countries outside the U.S. And then, a lot of the rest of the world uses the IEC standards. So there's kind of like North America and European electrical standards. And they're different. They're not that different. The further you go down the rabbit hole, like learning about them, they're not significantly different. But, we kind of look at North American market and international market slightly different when we create content for those places.
I'm curious to pick your brain a little bit on like what the global supply chains look like from your perspective. How much reliance do we have on like China or other players for actually producing the solar panels? Is there a risk? Could we produce panels entirely from the United States if we needed to, or if that became?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes, and maybe. It's a bit of a tricky one. So there, really the solar industry started in the United States primarily. It's like this technology was developed here in the U.S. originally, and then as it grew, became, such an international, market. And then, of course, like all manufacturing, the bigger manufacturing nations pick up on that at, higher volume, lower cost than we can usually compete with.
Right. We all scale things out in China, Indonesia, Malaysia.
Exactly. So just like any other products, any other electronics, whatever, we've seen that big shift where China really took over a lot of the manufacturing. A lot of the U.S. manufacturers for a long time continued to be in decline. And right now there's only a couple manufacturers that are making products in the United States. Now, making products in the United States has, a caveat to it as well. There's so many different pieces of these systems. Like if we talk about the solar panels themselves, we have the aluminum framework, we have the glass, we have the cells, we have the wires, we have the insulation, and then there's the assembly of all those things. So some companies do fundamentally like assembly, but they might not manufacture the individual parts in their factory. So maybe they're buying the glass from here, the aluminum from here, the cells from this manufacturer, and then they're, as a solar module manufacturer, they're doing an assembly, but not the original creation of everything. So that becomes a supply chain thing.
Are there any parts of the supply chain that are particularly vulnerable, like raw materials or components that are really only available from one place globally?
The one that I can think of off the top of my head that became an issue in this kind of post-COVID, supply chain issue world was, and just like a lot of places, computer chips. And so not in the solar panels, but in the inverters, in the power electronics, it takes the solar, synchronizes it to the grid, does all that. Those inverters were seeing issues with chips that are only coming from certain companies, and all of a sudden those chips became unavailable or the prices just skyrocketed. And so that's kind of, I would say, one of the primary examples I've seen is where it's kind of crippled part of an industry because of one small component. Whereas things like cell manufacturing, even though a lot of that is China, there's a lot of raw silicon mined available all over the world. And so it's not that we can't do it here. It's that it's all about price points, know? So we could and are intending to increase U.S. manufacturing again. Recently, as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA that Biden pushed through, there's a lot in there about basically bolstering U.S. manufacturing to try to bring U.S. manufacturing of solar and renewables components. So that can be solar panels, mounting systems, inverters, battery banks, all those sorts of parts, trying to create more manufacturing capacity in the United States via tax incentives and stuff like that. I don't know in the long term whether that's going to, shouldn't say it, if it's going to matter, because sometimes what happens is you put a lot of money into this, you create some new factories, and then 10 years down the road, those new factories are still competing in the open market. And can they compete at a price point in the open market that keeps them, basically what people want to buy. Right?
Yeah, so it's really a choice of government if they want to continue subsidizing something to exist purely from a perspective of resilience, because that resilience has value. If we get in an oh shit situation and supply chains are shut down, it's nice to have some option to buffer our own capacities.
Yeah, it is.
I would imagine that the COVID supply chain disruptions were really a wake-up call and a learning experience for many companies around the world. I can't imagine that they're sitting idle, but that they would recognize, the risks and opportunities that just, really became obvious in that crush, right?
Yeah, it's very true. We saw during that COVID and then post-COVID time with supply chain issues and manufacturing slowdowns or full stoppage at a lot of places, we've been seeing this very steady decline in like component costs for solar over 20 years. It's just been a constant, down ramping of prices as production goes up and cost goes down, which has made solar more cost competitive. That's why we're having this conversation, is like solar in the open market has become cost competitive with traditional fuel sources. And the more we bring those costs down, the more we can compete in different market spaces. So we get in this place where we're trying to bring costs down, but then this supply chain thing actually kicked prices back up a little bit. So we've seen a little bit of hardware increase in price over the last 2 years. Not a ton, but it could be 5%, 10%. Increase instead of what was a constant decrease before. So prices have come back up a little bit, but seems like they've flattened out. And then the other side, other than the hardware costs, is like soft costs in the U.S., of labor, permitting, all the processes that has to happen in order to design, build, install, and put those systems online. So not only did we see this like supply chain issues in the year to kind of post-COVID, we also saw the labor market become more challenging, right? I think we've all seen that it's harder to hire people. There's a lot of people that kind of stepped out of the labor market or changed what they saw they wanted to do for their life, whatever. But, it's been harder to get trained technicians.
We have demographic shifts happening where the boomer generation is getting out of the workforce. And then what do your younger generations look like? They certainly don't have the same experience that retiring generation had. And, what are the motivational factors? What is it like working with the younger generation?
Yeah.
I've been hearing for years from different companies that there's all kinds of different challenges working with the culture and the mindset. You could, have opinions about it, but the reality is, well, this is the society and the culture we have to work with. So companies are trying to
adapt.
Yeah, adopt appropriate mindsets. Has that entered into your business or the training that you offer? Have you seen that affect you?
Not directly, I would say. Our like student population that takes our training, it's interesting. I'll say students, but traditionally when we think of students, we're thinking of post high school, whatever, high school, college, or shortly thereafter. The vast majority of our students are probably 30 to 60. Age-wise, we probably average, somewhere in the 40s, and a lot of that is people who are taking professional development, career changes, moving from like, and this is like U.S. market stuff. I am an electrician, own my own electrical company, and I want to broaden into, being able to sell and install solar projects as well as my electrical work. We see that with roofing contractors. We see that with engineering firms that are wanting to basically take what they have as their baseline and advance that into, these other technologies. So So that's where we see a lot of our student population come from. It's people who are either career advancing or career shifting into something else. There's a percentage that are coming out of college or coming out of high school or trade programs and going right into solar and training programs. But there's a lot that are kind of career changing as well. Because of that and that like kind of labor shortage, and there's a reality to it here too, and this is a good and a bad. When we talk about solar workers and solar, basically people employed in the solar sector, there's a really vast kind of, I guess, different work that happens, or I would say there's how to put this right. There's a whole bunch of different job opportunities within the solar sector that are completely different from things like everything from manufacturing, shipping and receiving, accounting, sales, engineering and design, warehousing, installation, all that, right? So when we think about solar employees, we're not just thinking about installers. We're also thinking about marketing and admin and IT and all the things that come with it. So there's kind of a broad brush of skill sets that are required. Now, one of the big limitations is people that are going to do installation work. And installation work is hard work. We're talking about rooftops, hot days, carrying heavy, awkward things around. It's challenging work. And so to bring people in and get them trained up, and people that are also willing and able to be on rooftops, we need a much larger workforce in the U.S. and globally in order to meet the goals that everyone's setting for renewable, quantities. And so one of the things that, that at SEI we're focused on as well is basically how do we do workforce development better? How do we continue to grow not only our higher level design and engineering training programs, but our lower level, basic skills things as well? Some of that goes with things like apprenticeship programs, and also from the Inflation Reduction Act that had a bunch of things that leaned into apprenticeship programs for workers in solar in the United States. So we're looking closely and working with different organizations to create more content and create better programs to feed the kind of bottom end of the market. We're talking about not engineering jobs, but also how do I use basic tools? How do I carry modules? How do I mount them? How do I do a lot of the front end skills? Yep. And so we're working really hard on trying to build that part of our programming as well. Do
you offer any kind of like placement or recruiting services to help companies find qualified workers?
We do. It's a smaller part of what we do. The bigger piece really is training. We do have like a job posting board, and we try to connect employers with people who've come through our programs.
Seems like a natural thing. You essentially have that pool that you're generating.
I mean, and for me, just personally, I came to SEI as a student, and I got my first job from SEI's job posting board. And then I went out and I worked in the solar industry for a while, and then eventually came back and started teaching a little bit, and then getting more and more involved with SEI, and then eventually came on as full-time staff. And so I'm kind of a creation of that in a way, of training and job placement through our programs. We work with, a lot of different companies around the country to help, put people into jobs and to help connect the dots. But one interesting reality is we're seeing the majority of our students right now, wasn't so much in the past, but today, a vast majority of our students are actually already employed in the solar industry. And what's happening is companies are hiring them and then putting them into our programs as onboarding and corporate training programs. So we're seeing that as a big piece of our student population right now, is people who are already got the job in the solar industry, and their employers are helping them, basically get training through us.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that's exciting. It's really been a big shift. So we see manufacturers, developers, engineering companies putting people into our programs in bulk. And so we're just always trying to evolve as a training company to meet that market, right? To try to help this workforce development market grow. And really, honestly, a lot of it comes down to why we do our jobs at SEI is we want to see a solar industry grow and minimize the mistakes that are made out there. There's a lot of mistakes that can happen. This is electrical work. This is energy storage. It's roofing, right? So we have a lot of hazards. There's a lot of mistake potentials that come with these things. As technology moves fast and changes fast, people got to be well educated. Our codes and standards change really quickly. So here in the U.S., the National Electrical Code changes every 3 years. So we got to be on top of that. Mm-hmm. We got to teach people how to make those adjustments in their designs. And
you mentioned there's all these other aspects of like sales and financial management. Do you get into teaching more holistically how to run a solar-based business?
Not really. We don't. We have like one course on things like technical sales, but our wheelhouse has primarily been in the technical side.
Sure.
How to design, build, operate, maintain, and troubleshoot the electrical and the power systems. So that's really been the focus of our energy over the years, is really in that side of it. Because we always looked at it as like, as a fairly small company overall, we need to try to stay focused in where our strengths are. And there's a lot of different places to get not necessarily solar specific business training, but there's a lot of places to get other business training when it comes to construction industry and things like that. So that's where we've kind of stayed out of.
You mentioned two projects that you've been working on that there's quite a contrast between them. Do you want to tell me more about that?
Yeah, I mentioned that we've been working with a number of energy producers and oil companies, but we also work across the full spectrum, where on the environmental side, we have been recently working with the World Wildlife Fund on training programs. And I just think it's kind of ironic, the balance between, some of our clients being broadly across the spectrum here. The reason the World Wildlife Fund came to us is that as what they do in their global work for wildlife management and safety and education and everything that they do that's pretty amazing, they also know that they need to put their money where their mouth is, and they have offices in over 100 countries doing all this global work that's really amazing. But so they started to put solar on a lot of their offices. So they've had an initiative internally to put solar on as many of the WWF offices around the world as they can, and then also working on projects getting solar in national parks around the world. Things that are either helpful to those communities or things that are high profile to get solar out in, where it can be exposed, where people can be more exposed to it. I've become friends with some folks there. We've been working together on these training programs, and really where this started was the World Wildlife Fund is doing these projects in different countries, and they are working with local companies to help install these projects on their offices or the national parks or whatever. And they're realizing that in a lot of these countries they work, where there's very small or sometimes no solar markets, they really are starting from scratch. So you can go hire an electrical contractor or something, but they don't know anything about solar.
Yeah.
So how do you build projects in places with no knowledge or very, very tiny markets? And how do you also capacity build in those places? So their goal is exposure to solar and capacity building in these regions. And so a couple of the trainings we did this year, one was in Cambodia, the other one is in Bhutan. Cambodia has a little bit more of a market already going. Bhutan is really just beginning their whole solar market right now. They only had one company really in the country that was.
Did you get a chance to go out there?
I did.
I've heard Bhutan is just like beautiful country, very sweet people.
It was amazing.
And very remote up on the sides of the Himalayas, essentially.
Yeah, that was my first time there, and it was an incredible country. It was super beautiful. People were sweet. Food was amazing. And yeah, it's a real rare and unique opportunity to be able to be there and to, spend a couple of weeks there and work with the local teams. So with that class, what we did is we did an 8-day program for them, and it was a mix. There was some government and like banking and financial institution involvement, but they also have this big volunteer kind of upskilling program, and the government there is basically wanting to invest in a bunch of solar, and so training strategically across their some of their market, some of their higher level people helps them basically start the ball rolling for some of these projects. So there's been a couple of kind of bigger pilot projects that have happened there just over the last few months, and a bunch of our students were involved with those projects, kind of doing installation and project management parts of it. So It's really exciting to see, people who were in our classes back in March finishing, a couple of nice big pilot projects over the last month.
Yeah, and you're having an impact when you came into a place where that knowledge wasn't there. Now you've shared the knowledge. Those people are running with it. There's a ripple effect far beyond the time that you spent there. Yeah,
that's, for me personally, and I know speaking for a lot of our teams at SEI, that's the goal that we want. That's why we do our job, is like, I can go out and install solar all day, but I can only have, so much of an impact within my own personal work. But if we can help, as our team, help train thousands of people a year, we have this huge ripple effect, of getting more and more knowledge out into the world. And then those people, are doing more and more projects, and hopefully doing projects at a high quality, right? That's also what we're after, is not only getting more solar, but getting more solar that's going to work, high quality designs and installations, safe and smart troubleshooting practices. That's what we're trying to push out into the world, so we can build a much more robust solar industry, and not have, when any industry grows, you have growing pains, and we also know things like solar can be controversial by some people, of like, oh, well, this, people want to naysay on new technologies a lot. And so we want to build a solar industry that is safe, reliable, and ultimately, at the end of the day, a good return on investment. Yes, we have, of course, environmental aspirations with that, but we can't meet our environmental goals without also meeting our return on investment goals, right?
It has to be a yes for the individuals and the business owners who are adopting these technologies.
Yeah, and so there's reasons environmentally why people choose solar, absolutely, and that's wonderful. But if you really look at the market, the people that buy solar, it's probably less than 10% that actually choose it for solely environmental reasons. The majority of it are like, oh, if it's has a good environmental reason and it has a financial return on investment, okay, now you're going to move some market, And so if you think about how do you move the market, well, and then there's a lot of people who are buying solar because of the financial return on investment and don't care about the environmental value, right? So you're going to have a full continuum of people who are environmental only, return on investment only, and then in the middle, you're going to have people who are like, well, I'm getting both, But if you're not having a return on investment financially with your investment in solar, you're not going to get that big of a market to change with people who are environmental only.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So we got to win both games.
Yeah.
We got to win the return on investment and financial value game. And then we can, in my mind, win the environmental part as well. Right. But you can't just fight for one or the other.
Can you tell me about some of the concerns around waste products of solar? What's the resource extraction equation look like? Is there a recycling supply chain being generated around solar as the panels improve in efficiency? Maybe 10 years from now, I could get a panel that's twice as efficient. Talk about some of just the resource efficiency around the industry itself.
Yeah, yeah. So, one of the questions people ask a lot, and this will kind of lead into that resource side and the recycling side, is what we call like embodied energy. So you'll hear a lot of people talk badly about the solar industry will say, oh, well, it'll never produce as much energy as it took to make the panels. I hear that one a lot. It's kind of a myth. And that one's been debunked a long time ago. There's been a lot of studies on looking at how much embodied energy, how much energy does it take to mine the material, make the cells, make the glass, make the aluminum. Those are heavy, energy intensive processes, really, right, to make glass and aluminum, for example.
I mean, if you take something like mining, is the mining happening without use of fossil fuels?
No.
Yeah.
No, we're not using electric mining equipment necessarily. Yeah. We're using diesel. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then you have to tally all that and say how much of that goes into every panel, how much does a panel make over its lifetime. And so there's been a lot of studies over the years that are looking at the return on investment energy-wise, energy in to energy out for the solar panels themselves has been in the 1 year, 2 year range. And if you look at the rest of the equipment, the inverter, mounting system, wiring, all the rest, we can have systems that are in the 2 years, 3 years energy return on investment. So, you put that solar into production, and after 2 or 3 years, you've made back all the energy that it took to build that equipment, right? Then everything else for the next 10, 15, 20 years is basically a net positive energy gain, right? So that's one thing that I hear is like a myth a lot. But in reality, solar produces a lot more than it takes to make the equipment and install it. So that's good. Flip side of that is we are going to have a big, there's a life cycle to equipment. And so what's happening right now is there's a lot of equipment that's going out into the market, but not a ton of it that's coming back yet because of the timeline, right? If, solar panels are good for, most of them have a 20, 25-year warranty. And so you can kind of think of that as a useful life. Maybe some of them will go 30. But to your point as well, we also see people who put in a system 10 years ago and, there's new tax credits and I could upgrade. And, maybe I had 6,000 watts of solar on the roof of my house, but I can put in a new system. It's already paid for itself. I could put in a new system today and maybe I can get 8,000 watts or 10,000 watts in the same square area. So we do see panels that get pulled sometimes for upgrades, and then we see things that fail, or you may have a natural disaster, tornado, hurricane, something that takes out big solar farms. So we're just on the front end of seeing a lot of this product come back into as an end of use.
And if you look at the aluminum can be recycled, the glass can be recycled. The photovoltaic cells themselves, are those silicon, or what's some of the materials involved in that?
It's basically silicon, yeah. And so what's in most of the panels is the aluminum, the glass, the silicon cells. There's silver, because silver is the soldering that's in there. Most of them have gone away from lead, so most solar panels are lead-free. They use silver for soldering. There's copper wire, and there's plastics for insulation and things around the wires. If we look at how solar, at end of life was managed a few years ago, it'd be like you pull the aluminum frames off and you push the glass out, and you basically recycle the aluminum frames and the wires. And the problem with the glass and the cells is that's a laminated material. So they take the glass and then these plastic layers and then the cells and then the back sheets, and they laminate that, which makes it very difficult to break it apart, right? Because it's this laminated piece. So traditionally, you pull the aluminum, you cut the wires, and the rest goes in the dumpster. That's not a great system. That's not what the solar industry wants at ultimate end of life. What we're seeing is different companies, as we're starting to see more volume of returning product, different companies jumping into the solar recycling markets, which is great. We need that because we need it not only for solar, we need it for inverters, we need it for batteries. And we're just on the front end of seeing all that happen. And so there's a number of manufacturers that are making solar module recycling equipment. And so instead of just pulling the frames, they're able to take the glass with the cells and basically like pulverize it and separate materials that way.
Do they essentially smelt it back into something that is a liquid form that they can separate out into the different materials again?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how their process is where
Seems
they
like
separate.
You should be able to, well, you can melt glass.
Yep.
You should be able to melt silicon.
You can, yeah. And then it's separating the plastics and the silvers out. And it's amazing how crazy how some of that stuff happens. But there are products that are in the market beginning to be that are able to do 95% material repurposing out of solar panels. So the catch is it's not everywhere in local markets. And in the long run, what we're going to need is local or regional recycling of those materials, because taking a bunch of solar and shipping it somewhere far away has a huge cost to it. So you have to have kind of a regional recycling capability, and maybe that's state-based or, it's going to be based on the market for sure. You know?
And this is one of the themes of the changing global economy.
There will be a much more robust, product recycling and end-of-life program here as that becomes more needed. One of the things that comes up a lot is people talk about toxic materials in solar panels that make things, challenging for end-of-life. That is kind of a myth as well. There are some products that have some toxic materials in them, but it's less than 10% of the global market. So 90+% of the global market of solar uses solar panels that really don't have toxic materials per se. It's just a small sliver, and honestly just a couple manufacturers that. Yeah, so the panels are one thing, and we will get to a high level of recycling with them with the technology that's in the market already and growing. The other thing that people often ask about is energy storage and the battery side of things. We've moved very fast from lead acid battery technology into a much higher, percentage of lithium going into renewable energy systems. Lead acid, because it's a long-standing product line, it's very easy to recycle. And in the U.S., we see we can recycle 98% of lead acid batteries. And so there's a huge industry and infrastructure for that. Things like, solar and, lithium battery technologies, it's a new market. So it's going to take new technology and new infrastructure. So just like there's new solar recycling, there's also companies working on lithium battery bank recycling and repurposing. Things we thought weren't really possible 10 years ago are now becoming more and more possible. So that recycling market of these products is going to continue to grow as the market grows.
There's two other technologies I've heard about that work for essentially static locations, buildings, businesses, residential areas. One of them is a nickel iron battery. Was the Edison battery is what it was originally called. I don't know if he appropriated a lot of things, so I don't know if he was actually the inventor. But nickel and iron are both, that's a solid battery.
Yeah.
Doesn't have any moving parts, doesn't have any liquids.
Nickel. It does have liquids, actually.
Oh, does it?
Yeah. Nickel iron batteries have water that need to go in, and so it has.
Does that act as a dielectric?
So basically, what it in the same way that traditional lead acid batteries have worked, like the old style lead acid, what we call a flooded lead acid, where you have a cap, pour water in it as a maintenance piece. Nickel iron batteries are similar. They have a cap that needs water added back in. And so there's a couple pros and cons with that. And I think we're probably not going to see much growth of that market. Traditionally, it's been a great battery, and one of the best things about it is it lasted forever.
Right. I was so curious about this when I learned about these kinds of batteries, and then I saw they were so expensive. it didn't quite equate to me. Why is a nickel iron battery so expensive when they are materials that are readily available? It doesn't seem like the construction methodology. I don't know much about it. Is that a difficult construction methodology, or is that fairly straightforward as batteries go?
I'm not 100% sure because I haven't been on the manufacturing side of that. But there's a couple speculations. There's not really been anyone manufacturing those batteries in North America. So most of that's come from China primarily. There's been a couple U.S. companies repping them and bringing them in. There's kind of been a long joke about it too that lead acid batteries last about 6 to 12 years depending on quality and usage, where nickel irons can last 30 years. And so of course the joke has always been, well, why would you sell a 30-year product if you could sell a 10-year product and sell it again every 10 years?
Yeah.
It's a tougher business model. I don't know how much truth there is to that, but there is a reality. If you sell something that goes out in the world and it lasts for 30 or 40 years, is that,
and that's one of the reasons why the companies have to charge more for it, is because they're doing all the manufacturing and the shipping and the sales.
Yeah.
And then if they don't charge enough for the product, it's not a viable business model for them, regardless of the material costs.
Exactly. And so there really hasn't been any North American manufacturers of those types of batteries for a long time. It's not they're bad. They work great. They have kind of a higher level of maintenance than anything that's sealed, or definitely compared to the lithium market. And so right now it's really that the lithium market is growing with leaps and bounds, and the nickel iron market is kind of going down again. So
I've heard of a saltwater battery as well. That was the other one I was going to mention. I came across a company in northern Idaho that was doing that, and they were positioning their batteries mainly as they're actually more expensive, but they're totally non-toxic. It's like it's got salt water in it and a cotton. There's like a cotton pad inside of it.
Yeah.
So for cases where you're concerned about toxicity in the environment of wherever you're putting that battery, they were finding customers that needed that.
Yeah. So there's kind of two parts to that. I would say the toxicity when it comes to localized, like with a battery bank, that would only be in the case of some sort of catastrophic destruction,
sure,
right?
Sure.
Whether the thing caught on fire or it got hit by a tornado and, got totally damaged, because all that stuff is contained. Right. So in lithium or lead, the only way that stuff gets out is if it's significantly damaged in some way.
Of course, everybody knows the lead acid batteries in their cars, like they leak, they get corrosion on the terminals. It's kind of a mess. Typically.
So they can have various levels of messiness for sure. The reality is we see in the research and development side of things, people, everything from various types of solar cells to various chemistries of battery always being tried, right? Everyone's trying to find their magic new product. And so you're seeing companies that are trying different chemistries for batteries, different types of cells for solar, and some of that lives in the research and development phase. Some of it gets out of the university and the laboratory phase and starts to go to, attempt at commercialization. Some of them make it into commercialization, but then end up having problems in the field. So I've been in solar for quite a while. I've seen a lot of products like bubble to the top and then go away, and then bubble to the top and then go away. And then there's other ones that have been totally tried and true through the whole process. And so it's not that someone can't do something specific or different. It's can they also commercialize it into a way that is profitable over time, has the life cycle. Not only does it work good in a lab for 6 months or a year, but if I put it out in the field, how does it perform for 5 years and 10 years? So there's a lot of technology that we see in, the media that's like somebody developed this and new efficiencies of that.
Popular science, boom.
Yep. And so people will love to get that stuff out there because hopefully it starts to stir, market for their product or investors. right? So a lot of them are angling for investors to come in and try this stuff. But there's a lot of stuff that just doesn't come to commercialization. Our job at SEI is, we have to focus primarily on what is commercially available technology and how do we teach people to use that today, and that's our focus. We don't spend a lot of, now individually we keep an eye on those things because we're fascinated and we want to see what's the next thing coming down the line. But the reality is there's so many things that come up and go away as far as different technologies that we have to focus on the stuff that is tried and true, most commercial available, and is likely to be around for a while. That's our focus from a training perspective, at least.
So paint a vision for me in 10 years. Where do you think we could be in terms of solar energy usage, and how would that be beneficial for humanity?
Yeah, it's a big question. Yeah. Ultimately, what I see with the solar industry is it's going to continue to grow at the trajectory it has or faster. If you look at where it was 20 years ago and the size of the global market and where it is today, it is just a massive increase. And what the projections are is that it's going to increase at that rate or faster over the next 5 years and 10 years. And so I foresee that we're going to have a massive continuation of a booming solar industry and overall, kind of an energy change from, and it's not just solar, there's other technologies too, but solar has become really the market leader in fastest new energy being put onto the grid at the highest rate. So primarily solar and wind from the renewable standpoint. But if you look at the amount of solar going in compared to other technologies, that number is growing every year. It's becoming pretty staggering. I think cost reduction, scaling is going to continue to make the return on investments better, which is going to continue this growth of the solar industry. With that, though, is going to come a lot of job needs, right? So we're in a place right now in the United States. We have approximately 250,000 people that work in the solar industry in the U.S. today. That number is expected to double and double and double. So we could be at, 1 million or more. I know there's a lot of solar industry projections for the U.S. market over the next 5 or 10 years and how many employees we need, working in solar in order to meet our climate goals, our energy goals, all these things. And so I see a dramatic increase in installation and projects, but what comes with that is hiring and training. And so that's what we're trying to do at SEI is to help train this workforce as fast as we can to bring on as many people as possible and to get those people into new clean tech jobs and get people out there that are project ready, that are going to go out, get onto new job sites and be, valuable to the employers right off the bat. That's what we're gunning for is how do we move this market faster? And because the market's going to move, it is moving super fast, and the limitations are what holds us back. And part of that is product supply in the past, and part of that is workforce and training. And so our focus is that workforce and training side.
What does that mean for us in society? Like when that vision actually becomes a reality, when we have more solar?
I look at it as a few things. We're kind of changing the way that we use energy, which can, of course, reduce demand on our fossil fuel systems and other things that are, creating our bigger environmental problems. So hopefully, the goal would be that by increasing solar dramatically, we can reduce our dependency on other fuel sources. There's a lot of different benefits to that too. So there's an environmental impact, but also one of the things with solar is we have energy that can be deployed fairly quickly and in, areas all over the place. So it can be big power plants, but it can also be very, distributed. And that gives a lot of flexibility. It actually can give more utility grid stability by having more generation scattered all over the place. It also means some things are harder to damage. If a section of the grid goes out or a power plant goes down, we have more, kind of energy diversification in a way.
Backup options.
And
you're not going to be disrupted by a change in the price of oil from month to month.
Yeah. It's interesting right now, if you look at there's been a lot of solar going on in Europe for a long time, but right now it's because of the situation with Russia and Ukraine and trying to limit the amount of Russian oil coming out, the amount of solar and storage that's being invested into Europe right now is staggering. So a lot of manufacturers are sold out of their product lines for a year because Europe is trying to diversify its energy mix as quick as possible and not have so much dependence on one product stream, basically, or one energy stream. But the reality is we see geopolitics affect markets for solar because solar can bring energy, distribution in a way that other technologies haven't traditionally. And so when you ask me, what do we see a benefit 10 years from now? That's another benefit I see is regional energy production, microgrids, more reliable power systems, more reliable backup systems, and capacities that we didn't have before. So I think there's a lot of exciting things that this brings. Also have to remember, if we're talking about what's this bring for humanity in the future, we're coming from a place where still, a third of the planet doesn't have access to electricity or clean water, and we look at how many people in the world don't have access to energy, or it's very, very small quantities. We kind of look at how we can help humanity in a whole lot of different ways also. And so there's a lot of different angles that you can look at, from, how I run my farm or my business or my factory to how, my utility grid or, people living in remote towns and villages. Solar can be beneficial on so many different levels. That's why, to me, it's super exciting technology.
What resources and allies will help make that vision take place?
God, there's a lot of different, just like the geopolitics, there's a lot of different pieces to what it takes to grow this industry. We've talked about a lot of them today, but it's the combination of manufacturing, workforce development and training, which is our piece. There's a lot of banking and financial backing that has to go into these, right? So when we talk about big systems, they're being funded by big banks or investors who are buying, the power plants and have to look at return on investment. So there's an investment piece, a financial piece. So whether you own a factory or a building, are you willing to invest in solar? Whether you own a home and your willingness to invest in solar. So those are some of the things that are going to continue to affect this market. Financials, building good systems today so the banks will support and the investors will support them later. It goes back to, I mentioned return on investment. The people that put all this money into these projects need to see the value or they're going to stop doing it. So we need good quality systems that produce what they expect them to produce over time, and people who are capable of doing the maintenance and the upkeep on these things. So those are some of the major key pieces to this market continuing to grow. But ultimately, it comes down to, in a lot of ways, what are we competing with cost-wise? What do people pay for electricity otherwise? What's it cost them if they switch to solar as a partial or a full alternative? Are we competing with utility-supplied electricity? Are we competing with diesel generators in remote areas? Is the utility price of electricity subsidized or not? Those can affect things, a lot when it comes to market growth.
So it sounds like you've got a combination of the manufacturing, the deployment and installation, the business models, and the way that it actually reaches people and the cost effectiveness of it.
Yep.
Seems like probably a big place where innovation is going to continue to happen.
It is.
Yeah.
And I'll throw on top of their codes and standards. And that can be everything from National Electrical Code, building codes and fire codes, utility interconnection standards when it comes to how different utilities around the country allow interconnection of solar into their grids. What are the rules? What are the price points for buying and selling? Those things all affect this as well. So there's a lot that comes down to utility level, municipal level, and and how we develop and change codes and standards and safety and things like that with these systems. So there's a bunch of different pieces that all go together to make this industry continue to grow and produce more and more reliable electricity.
So where can people find out more about SEI? And are there any current or upcoming programs that you're excited about and you want to tell people about?
Yeah, so you can find SEI at solarenergy.org on the web. So if you just go to solarenergy.org and you'll find our website. In there, it has our whole catalog of courses, which is basically we have courses that kind of run back to back to back. So whenever one round of courses ends, another one starts. And so we have online programs that people can take at their own pace that run back to back and people take from all over the world. If people are interested in any hands-on parts, then they can do the online theory and then come to places like here in Western Colorado and visit our training center and take some of our hands-on lab classes as an excuse to come be in a beautiful place and spend time in gorgeous Western Colorado in the summer. So we get a lot of people who come and take class, the next year come back and take another class, and then eventually they're like, we need you to make more classes because this has become my summer vacation time.
Yeah.
So, there's
convince my employer to send me here.
Exactly. And a lot of employers do send their staff to our hands-on programs here. So yeah, we will continue to offer the best online training programs. We continue to update content and curriculum and expand our offerings. And so, that's our primary work is the online programs and our hands-on. But then, like I mentioned, we also have people that hire us to come and do custom training for their teams. Like in 2 weeks, I'm heading down to Arizona to teach a class for Tucson Electric Power on how their maintenance teams handle troubleshooting and testing of some of their power plants, their solar power plants. So there's different ways that we can help and be part of the growth of this industry. And our big place is trying to deliver knowledge and build workforce.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Really appreciate this and really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me and spending the time today.